So, dear and respected friends, I would like to request you to kindly mute yourself so that we can avoid disruptions. Yes, thank you so much. And first of all, my heartiest wishes to all the gurus for their invaluable contribution in shaping the world, shaping the society, shaping the civilization. A teacher nourishes the soul, shape up mind and personality. A society has much to owe to the wise men, the enlightened educators. So let us begin the session with an invocation of a song dedicated to the teachers. Let me share the screen. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Namaste, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this beautiful evening. Greetings with all our heart. We welcome all the honorable guests for their kind presence to today SOHSS Chakra Talk. I, Randhir Gautam, head of the Department of Raffles University. On behalf of Raffles University, I welcome you. I also welcome you on behalf of SOHSS Chakra, Viswanidham Center for Asian Blossoming, and Rage Global Foundation USA. It is a great pleasure and indeed an honor to have available with us our distinguished speakers, Professor Ramesh Chandra Pradhan, former Professor of Philosophy, University of Hyderabad. We welcome you, sir. We also welcome Professor Binod Kumar Agarwala, former Professor of Philosophy, Northeastern Hill University.
Sorry, Randhir, it's Professor Binod Kumar Agarwala.
Binod Kumar Agarwala, sorry. I'm sorry. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our Chief Patron, Honorable Justice Meena Bigomber, former Chief Justice of Rajasthan High Court, Professor Kumar Giri from Madras Development Institute, SOHSS Chakra family, and all the respected participant, viewers, listener. Welcome to this special talk on the vision and philosophy of Dr. S. Radhakrishnan. Before the talk, let me give a brief introduction to our SOHSS Chakra, a circle of self and mutual study. SOHSS Chakra, it is an initiative of studying and learning together self, culture, societies, and the world. Friends associated with this are eager to work and mediate with the new horizons of thinking and new movements of social and cultural change at work in our contemporary world. We study seekers such as Sri Aurobindo, Mahatma Gandhi, Chittaranjan Das, a creative thinker from Odisha, and many others around the world. We also present our own writings and reflect upon our creativity together. We also invite seekers from different fields of life to share with us their lives, sadhana, vision, struggle for creating a world of beauty, dignity, and dialogues. We meet every Sunday or sometimes on Wednesday. Now we are nurturing this dialogue in collaboration with School of Humanities and Social Science of Raffles University and Rage Global Foundation, USA. Today is a very special day, that is to say the Teacher's Day. We are remembering great philosopher, creative philosopher, Professor Radhakrishnan, a man of international repute, whose missions and message as philosopher and teacher have won for him the subject of Indians' culture and a spiritual ambassador. I can recall philosopher broken words, and I quote, he said, "I believe finally that the teacher is engaged not simply in the training of an individual, but in the formation of the proper social life." And I quote, he said, "I believe that every teacher should realize the dignity of his calling, that he is a social servant set apart for the maintenance of proper social order and the securing of the right social growth. I believe that this is the way the teacher always is the prophet of the true God and a servant in the true kingdom of God." With this word, now I would like to invite Professor Anant Kumar Giri sir to kindly moderate the session.
Thank you so much, dear Randhir. A warm welcome to Professor Ramesh Chandra Pradhan, Professor Binod Kumar Agarwala, and all friends co-present in this afternoon and in our meditation and walking with the vision and practice of being a teacher, and also with Dr. S. Radhakrishnan. Now, Dr. S. Radhakrishnan was a multidimensional person, and the little we read about him and his many works and are full of so much of deep insights, and very rarely one come across philosophical works and which are simultaneously so deep journey, really giving us an experience of spiritual realization. As in fact, I was reading his Recovery of Faith in Shillong in 2018, and I got it from a public library. And before that, many years ago, almost 30 years ago, I had read his work Bhagavad-Gita, and reading this, one realizes his work on Bhagavad-Gita, one realizes how Dr. Radhakrishnan, with his deep seeking, really engages with Indian tradition with a very deep, comparative, global philosophical engagement. And this comparison is not just a familiar comparison of this versus that. It is really a very deep spiritual journey of finding threads from all traditions. And that itself is a remarkable.
Sir, I think you are muted. Kindly unmute yourself.
So I was saying that his work on Bhagavad Gita, where he at the same time invites us to threads of connection to many philosophical and spiritual traditions of the world. And that itself is not just a simplistic comparison. It is a comparison of simultaneous understanding, what philosopher Alistair MacIntyre calls comparison of comparisons. And another aspect of Dr. Radhakrishna's life is that when we read about him, how his life as a human being was deeply nurtured by a sense of tapasya, a sense of simplicity, his whole way of being with the world, his devotee. And I read a note that even when he was the ambassador to Moscow, so he sat on a mat, and his way of being with the world is so earthly, so simple. And it is with that way of being, that sadhana, that philosophical insights emerge. And the story goes that when he went to meet Stalin, and he could touch Stalin in a personal way, and Stalin could feel the difference of presence of Dr. Radhakrishnan. And he then commented, so far people have not really related to me as a human being, that whether they have been afraid of me or they have portrayed me as a monster, but you are the first person who are really touching me as a human being. So that way of being philosophical, and of course Dr. Radhakrishnan, great sense of contribution to freedom movement. And it seems one of his first philosophical works was philosophy of Rabindranath Tagore. And so many of his deep works, his way of being in the world, his contribution to building the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, and what a remarkable way that his presidential palace was gifted to scholars. And Professor Pradhan was a national fellow there just some years ago. And we read that it was Dr. Radhakrishnan who insisted that let us make it Institute of Advanced Study rather than studies. That sense of unity, a unity consciousness that emerges, a unity consciousness in our encounter with knowledge, in our encounter with the world. So it is so much that we can learn with the vision, philosophy, and practice of Dr. Radhakrishnan. And we are really enriched today by the presence and presentations of Professor Ramesh Chandra Pradhan, a deep philosopher of our times, and his own philosophical work ranges so many aspects of contemporary human condition, language, and so on and so forth. And also Professor Binod Kumar Agarwal, another deep philosopher of our times, and in a very creative spirit of continuing the work of Dr. Radhakrishnan, Professor Agarwal also engages with the philosophical question with a sense of spontaneous ease of simultaneously going deeper to Indian philosophical traditions, his knowledge of Sanskrit and everything, and also the Greek. And that kind of simultaneity is so inspiring. So with this submission, so it is a joy for us to listen to Professor Pradhan and Professor Agarwal. So we would request Professor Pradhan to begin with speak for half an hour, and also Professor Agarwal, and then we would learn further with you through a dialogue. So Professor Pradhan, please.
Thank you, Professor Giri, for your kind introduction and also to Professor Randhir Gautam for his generous introduction about me and my co-speaker. I'm personally thankful to Professor Giri for inviting me to this celebration of the Teachers' Day and to speak on this occasion. And I'm indeed grateful to the whole Swadhyaya Sachakra family for giving me this opportunity to speak on Dr. Radhakrishnan, a favorite philosopher of mine. With a personal note, I will begin that I started reading philosophy by reading or with the reading of works of Dr. Radhakrishnan, even when I was in my graduation studies. So that shows my personal attachment to his philosophy and personality. Professor Giri has given a very nice introduction to Dr. Radhakrishnan as a person, as a philosopher, and his being with the world, as he has nicely put it. He behaved as a philosopher should behave, and in that sense, he was really, truly a philosopher, though he occupied very high public offices. The high public offices did not really affect his philosophical mind and his philosophical personality. So with these words, let me come back to how we should remember Dr. Radhakrishnan as a philosopher. What are his ideas which really are permanently in the consciousness of the human beings, not only of the Indians, but also the people all over the world? In a sense, he was a global philosopher of his time. He was not confined to India alone. He thought, spoke on the global platform. As a Spalding professor of Eastern religions and ethics, he occupied one of the most eminent chairs in the University of Oxford, and that gave him the opportunity to speak to the world in a sense. And therefore, he was, in a sense, a global personality, not only as a president of India, but also as the philosopher himself. Let us try to understand how he contributed to the domain of philosophy. He has interpreted Indian thought, Indian spiritual tradition in English to the entire humanity. And it was his mission to bring Indian wisdom from the ancient times to the present day to the entire world. He thought that Indian philosophy has remained somewhere in the backdrop, or Indian philosophy has been mostly in a sense in limbo, and he brought it out to the limelight of the world. That was his greatest contribution. His 2 volumes of Indian philosophy, really a landmark development in the exposition of Indian philosophy. Nobody has written, of course, there are other books on Indian philosophy by Dasgupta, by Hirayana, and many others, but these 2 volumes, really a kind of authentic exposition of the Indian mind as a whole. And that is one of his single most contribution to the Indian civilization and to the world civilization at large. So he was really one philosopher who was in the tradition of the Vedantic Acharyas. He also commented on the 3 Prasthanantrayas, the Bhagavad-Gita, the Upanishads, and the Brahma Sutra. So he's the only philosopher who has written in English language these 3 commentaries. And therefore, that is another singular contribution to the world of philosophy by Dr. Radhakrishnan. He brought the Indian wisdom through the Prasthanatrayas, the three great classic Vedantic texts, to the entire world. So in that sense, that remains a permanent contribution on his part. Let us come to his own philosophy. Apart from interpreting Indian wisdom and the world wisdom in a sense, he built a system of his own, and that is best expounded in his work, the most important work, An Idealist View of Life. Of course, he has expressed his philosophical ideas also in his Recovery of Faith, which to which Professor Giri also referred. This is one of the landmark books on spirituality, because he talked about the recovery of spiritual faith, really. So besides this, there are many other works where his ideas have really flourished. And let me just try to bring out some of the seminal ideas. The most appreciable and the most important idea that he brings out is an idealistic view of life and the world. So philosophically, he belonged to the idealist school of philosophy. And in Indian context, it is Vedanta, which is an idealistic system of thought. Therefore, he naturally started with the Vedantic ideas, which are really expounded by Shankaracharya in his Advaitic metaphysics. And as somebody who has written commentary on the three Prasthanatrayas, cannot but be an idealist of the Vedantic framework. So in a sense, his philosophy is rooted in Vedanta, especially Advaita Vedanta, which is expounded in what we call the philosophy of Brahman and philosophy of Atman. And he has expounded Advaita Vedanta, especially Sankara's Advaita Vedanta, in the most positive way. There has been many negative association with Shankaracharya's Advaita. Sometimes it is called world denying, it is also called life denying, and also it is called some kind of an austere interpretation of human life. That is the traditional view associated with Mayavada, or what we call the idea that the world is Maya, is an illusion, and nothing to expect from this world, and everything lies beyond the world. Such a view of Advaita Vedanta, Dr. Radhakrishnan has refuted, and he has established Advaita again, a new platform. That's why he is sometimes called a Neo-Vedantin in the Indian context. And perhaps he will be the second philosophical thinker of our country after Swami Vivekananda to have expounded Advaita Vedanta in a positive, practical, and man-oriented way in English language, especially speaking to the West. Because it is the West which has sometimes misunderstood Indian philosophical traditions, starting from Hegel, accepting Schopenhauer. Many of the traditional Western thinkers think Indian philosophy is Vedanta, and Vedanta is life denying, and Vedanta is nothing but some kind of a Mayavada of a very truncated kind. But this idea he really refuted. And he made it very clear that Vedanta is the quintessence of all Indian religions, and also the quintessence, perhaps, of the world religions. So in a sense, he tried to prove that Vedanta can provide the much needed religion of the spirit, as he calls it. He thought he was a deep interest in all religions of the world, and therefore he sometimes is called the philosopher of religion, rather than he is characterized as a philosopher of religion and philosopher of comparative religion. But behind that, at the root of his philosophical thinking was this idea that all the religions converge on one thing, that is the elevation, the spiritual elevation of the human mind, the finite human mind to the infinite divine mind. That was the journey, a religious journey or a spiritual journey from the finite to the infinite. This was his main framework of a religion. So he redefined religion. In fact, he was very much appreciated by the Christian world because he gave a very, very philosophical interpretation of the dogma ridden Christianity. And he expounded in such a way, for example, in his book, Eastern Religions and Western Thought. And he has devoted many chapters in it to expounding the Christian religion. He had a deep appreciation of the Christian religion, just like Mahatma Gandhi had. And he in fact brought Christianity closer to Hinduism. He made a bridge between Hinduism and the rest of the Indian religions with the Western religion, especially Christianity. He was a bridge builder, and in a sense, he made the East and West speak to each other. He made these two religions, Hinduism and along with other Indic religions, speak on equal terms with the Christianity. So that perhaps speaks of his synthetic vision of world and life, and that also is part of his general understanding of what he calls idealism. When he talks about idealism, he means by idealism a philosophical worldview which centers around the notion of spirit or the notion of a divine consciousness. He got the idea from the Vedantic sources that the ultimate reality cannot be other than the divine consciousness called Brahman. Brahman is Sat Chit Ananda, and we can call it consciousness because it is Sat and also Chit and also Ananda. And this is what is called a divine consciousness. To put it in Sri Dr. Radhakrishnan's words, and Sri Aurobindo also comes to the same conclusion. So in a sense, there is a great unanimity among the contemporary Indian thinkers on the basic idealistic vision of the world and life. Now, coming back to Dr. Radhakrishnan, he thinks that it is Sachidananda which is the ultimate reality. And if Sachidananda is the only reality, that is the ultimate reality and also the one absolute reality, then the world and the human beings must have a place within the framework of the divine consciousness or the Brahmanic consciousness. The human individual will be a part of this Brahmanic consciousness, but also will be a finite part of this consciousness. And therefore, he reiterated the Vedantic and the Advaitic notion that the Atman is the same as the Brahman. The Jivatman is also same as the Brahman. So Jiva Brahmaiva na para. Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. Of course, we have to understand the word Mithya differently. The Jiva Brahmaiva na paraha. So this Advaitic vision he has re-established in a new formulation. He has given a new meaning to the word Mithya. In fact, the word Maya he has not emphasized so much in his understanding of his ideology. He is not, in that sense, Advaitin in the classical sense of the term, because he has given Maya, in a sense, Maya is given a positive meaning, that Maya is nothing but ajnana. It is like a veil which comes between the human mind, human being, and the divine mind. So once this Maya is withdrawn or taken away, then we realize the Brahman. So in that sense, he came to the conclusion that human beings must be spiritually enlightened. That is, these human beings must realize their own spiritual self, which he called the higher self. And this higher self is nothing but Brahman or Atman. And therefore, human individual has to realize his identity with the supreme reality, that is Brahman. So this is so far as his notion of the human life is concerned. It is an idealistic view of life precisely because he doesn't believe that human reality can be explained only in terms of the body or in terms of the material components of our body. He believed that man is a spirit, is an Atman, though we do not realize that we are Atman, but we can realize, and that is our supreme wisdom. Let us come to his notion of the world. If Brahman is absolutely real, then what happens to the world? This has been the ancient enigma which the Vedantic thinkers have felt. Of course, the Buddhists have also felt the same puzzle about the world. How to account for this world? The Vedantic solution was, which comes from the Upanishadic wisdom itself, that the world must be manifestation of the Brahman. The world cannot have an independent existence other than the Brahman. So world must be placed within the Brahminic consciousness. But in that sense, is it bound to be a kind of illusion? Is it bound to be a Maya in the crude sense of the term? Is it unreal? Is it mithya? Dr. Radhakrishnan says, no, the world is real because it is in Brahman and it has been an expression of the Brahman. So in that sense, he really brings back the world to its right position, because if we say that the world is Maya, then the whole entire effort of ethics to provide a new vision of life will be of no use, because if ultimately man leads an illusory life, then there is no reason why man should seek salvation or man should seek the higher realization of the Supreme Brahman. So in that sense, in a sense, he wants to say that the world must be real, and the world is an expression of the Brahman. The world is an absolute. The world is not an absolute reality, but it is part of the absolute reality. So that relation between world and Brahman is settled by him in more positive terms. Apart from the fact that he is very much aware of the scientific understanding of the world, he doesn't deny that the world has a material constitution. He doesn't deny that the world is discovered by science in terms of material laws or physical laws. But he doesn't find any conflict between the physical laws and the supreme reality of the world as an expression of the Brahman. He thinks that science and philosophy can come together, because science also tries to understand the deeper mystery of the world, and philosophy is trying to solve it. Philosophy also unfolding the mystery by, or solving the mystery by telling us that the world has a higher structure in consciousness, because it is a manifestation of consciousness. So in that sense, the world is not a purely physical world. It is not a mechanistic world, and it must be understood in terms of Brahman, in terms of consciousness, in terms of the divine mind, rather than in terms of any material forces or in terms of space, time, and motion, etc., which science is trying to suggest that the world is like this. Now, coming back to his idea of a religion, because there some of his important contributions come. So religion for him is now coming closer to philosophy. Philosophy and religion are not the same, of course, because religion has its practical orientation. Religion is a way to salvation. Religion way is a kind of spiritual experience. But fortunately for Radhakrishnan, philosophy is not far behind religion, or it is not, in that sense, it is showing any anti-religious kind of tendency, as it is the case in much of the Western philosophy in the contemporary times. It has been anti-religious. It has been nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with any idealistic vision of life. But Dr. Radhakrishnan believes that there is no way from escaping the framework of the idealistic thought, because religion itself is suggesting that the world is of a higher nature. The world is participating in a higher reality called God. And Dr. Radhakrishnan is presenting the religious worldview in a more philosophical framework. Therefore, for him, philosophy and religion have the same goal, though philosophy is a more contemplative, a meditative approach to the entire reality, but it is religion which sows the seeds of idealism. Therefore, he traces idealism to the sources from spiritual experience, which is the same as religious experience. So in that sense, religion and philosophy go hand in hand for him, and therefore he doesn't discriminate between philosophy and religion. And science, as we have seen, science, religion, and philosophy for him constitute one block of disciplines, and perhaps they converge rather than diverge. So he brings idealism into religion, into science in a sense, and also into philosophy. Let me come to the another aspect of his vision, his philosophical vision. How does idealism really affect his understanding of society, understanding of the human community, and the understanding of the what we call the public world, or what he calls the future human race? He is one, like any other Indian philosopher, is concerned with the future of human civilization. And in most of his works, especially a work which is called Religion in a Changing Society, where he has shown how religion, for him, religion here perhaps take the place of philosophy, affect the future of the human civilization. He's keeping religion in the forefront, because if religion comes, then philosophy also will follow. So in that sense, both religion and philosophy are going to affect the human world. That is how he thinks about the human world, the future of the human society. Now he's singularly concerned with the idea that the future of human civilization lies in the spiritual regeneration of mankind. In many of his works, he says the present age of mankind is an age of crisis, a spiritual crisis. On this, he is one with Mahatma Gandhi, uh, whom he had admired very much, and on whom he has also uh, edited a very famous volume, Essays and Reflection on Mahatma Gandhi. Now, the civilization which he means the civilization which is dominated by science and technology, he says, has really lost its spiritual moorings, and our civilization has become spiritually uprooted. That is, his recovery of faith is really a warning to the modern civilization, or the people of this civilization, that everything is not well with this present civilization, because in spite of its marvelous achievements in science and technology, in all departments of human life, yet human life has lost direction, and human life has really lost the values. And these values, Dr. Radhakrishnan thinks, will come from spirituality. So in a sense, if we realize our spiritual self, if we understand the world in terms of spirituality rather than in terms of materiality, then we can redesign our society. We can redesign our state. And in fact, he talks of the world community, which will be based on the realization of the values, the ethical values of peace, harmony, and tranquility. And that will not be possible if man doesn't realize his higher self. And that's why he says the future of humanity lies in how we realize ourselves, how we realize higher values in life. Because the new society, he calls the unborn soul of the world, is emerging. In fact, here, Sri Aurobindo also comes to the same point. that we are waiting for a new civilization based on spirituality. And both as the exponents of ancient Indian wisdom, both prophesied that the future of human civilization lies on its spiritual salvation or spiritual regeneration. That is the recovery of faith he talks about. It is not a faith in a personal God alone, but that is the recovery of our faith in our own spirituality. How this will be possible? He says it is possible because religions have already shown the way. They have failed on their way, but they have sown the seeds. In every religion, there is a spiritual consciousness. There is the invocation of the divinity, invocation of the infinity. And that spiritual consciousness is already built into our uh, religious systems. But now is the time to make a transformation. And this transformation will not deny science, will not deny uh, anything that we have achieved. It has only to go beyond what we have. So it is not a negation of anything. It is rather reaffirmation of the scientific spirit, but at the same time to harmonize it with a religious or a spiritual life. How this will be possible, that was his entire effort. In his writing, of course, numerous writings, perhaps it may be uh, not less than 60 or so. In all his writings, the same voice of spirit is present. So Dr. Radhakrishnan embodies the spirit of idealism of the highest kind in 20th century. Maybe he will not be of appreciable, he will not be appreciated by many die-hard philosophers of the present time who are bogged down with a materialistic understanding of the world and human beings. And much of contemporary philosophy of mind, unfortunately, is struggling with even understanding the mind, but they cannot understand in Radhakrishnan terms. They can understand in some kind of a materialist terms. So Radhakrishnan will be a permanent warning to all these thinkers who have become myopic, who have become short-sighted, and who have closed their eyes to the reality of the universe. They have lost the woods for the trees, and they have lost the humanity for materiality, for wealth, for scientific brilliance, and so on and so forth. But nothing of this sort will be passed, nothing of this sort will pass through the serious tests that Dr. Radhakrishnan has set before the philosophical mind. Either they understand philosophy in the eyes of the Plato, or in the eyes of a Hegel, or in the eyes of a Shankaracharya, or in the eyes of the Upanishad thinkers, or according to Dr. Radhakrishnan, they will be doing nothing but uh, concept chewing or concept splitting, and that will be the end of a philosophical, glorious philosophical journey. So Dr. Radhakrishnan, I will conclude. Dr. Radhakrishnan stands for a global vision of a spiritually regenerated humanity. He is a philosopher of humanity. He is not a philosopher only confined to a specific problem of a particular time of history. He wants to see, like Plato, the whole entire history of mankind from a timeless point of view. He wants to see the reality sub specie eternitatis. And that is the greatness of the philosopher called Dr. Radhakrishnan. I am thankful to all of you for listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Pradhan. And your own journey, your own exposition of Dr. Radhakrishnan itself was an inviting experience for us to feel the quest of Dr. Radhakrishnan. And it has been really enriching. In our SOHSS family, we have some friends who are a little enriched by translation of it into Odia. And it
Yeah.
is in that spirit and with your generosity, I'll take a few minutes, 5 minutes or so, to present your thoughts in Odia and then invite Professor Agarwala. So, ଆମର ଭାଇ ଭଉଣୀ ମାନେ ଆଜି ଆମ ସହିତ ପ୍ରଫେସର ରମେଶ ଚନ୍ଦ୍ର ପ୍ରଧାନ ଅଛନ୍ତି। ସେ ନିଜେ ଅନେକ ଗଭୀର ଦାର୍ଶନିକ ଏବଂ ସେ ତାଙ୍କର ଏଇ ବ୍ୟାଖ୍ୟାନରେ କହିଲେ ଯେ ତାଙ୍କର ଯେଉଁ ଦର୍ଶନର ଅଧ୍ୟୟନଟି ମୂଳତଃ ଡକ୍ଟର ରାଧାକୃଷ୍ଣଙ୍କ ଠାରୁ ଆରମ୍ଭ ହେଇଥିଲା। ସେ ପଢ଼ିଥିଲେ ଯେ ତାଙ୍କର ଡକ୍ଟର ରାଧାକୃଷ୍ଣଙ୍କର ବହିମାନ ପଢ଼ିଥିଲେ ଆଉ ବିଏ ଫିଲୋସଫିର ଛାତ୍ର ହିସାବରେ। ଆଉ ଡକ୍ଟର ରାଧାକୃଷ୍ଣଙ୍କର ଯେଉଁ ଭାରତୀୟ ଦର୍ଶନର ଯେଉଁ ଇତିହାସ, ଯେଉଁ ଦୁଇଟି ଗ୍ରନ୍ଥ, 2 ଭଲ୍ୟୁମର, ଏଇଟା ଗୋଟେ ଅନନ୍ୟ ସୃଷ୍ଟି। ଆଉ ଭାରତୀୟ ଦର୍ଶନର ବିଭିନ୍ନ ଧାରା ତାର ଗୋଟେ ଅଥେଣ୍ଟିକ ପରିପ୍ରକାଶ ଘଟିଛି ଏବଂ ତାଙ୍କର ଅନେକ ଲେଖା ଭିତରୁ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ଭିତରୁ ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ହେଉଛି ସେ ଯେ କେବଳ ଯେଉଁ ଦର୍ଶନକୁ ସେ ହେଉଛନ୍ତି ଗୋଟେ ବେଦାନ୍ତ ଆଚାର୍ଯ୍ୟର ଧାରାରେ ଆଉ ଯେମିତି ଶଙ୍କରାଚାର୍ଯ୍ୟ ପ୍ରସ୍ତନ ତ୍ରୟୀ ଭଗବତ-ଗୀତା ଉପନିଷଦ ଏବଂ ବ୍ରହ୍ମସୂତ୍ରର ବ୍ୟାଖ୍ୟା କରିଥିଲେ ଏବଂ ଆମେ ଏଠି ଅନୁଭବ କରିବା ଯେ ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ ବ୍ୟାଖ୍ୟା ଭାରତୀୟ ଧାରାରେ ଏଇ ଯେଉଁ ବ୍ୟାଖ୍ୟା କେବଳ ଭାରତୀୟ ଧାରାରେ ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ ଦାର୍ଶନିକ ପରମ୍ପରାରେ ବ୍ୟାଖ୍ୟା ହିଁ ଗୋଟେ ସୃଜନଶୀଳ ଦର୍ଶନର ଏକ ଉତ୍ସ। ଆମର ବ୍ୟାଖ୍ୟା ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ ହିଁ ଆମେ ନିଜର ଦାର୍ଶନିକ ଦୃଷ୍ଟିକୋଣକୁ ସେଟାକୁ ଆମେ ଆବିଷ୍କାର କରିଥାଉ ଏବଂ ସେଟାକୁ ଆମେ ନିବେଦନ କରିଥାଉ। ଏବଂ ଡକ୍ଟର ରାଧାକୃଷ୍ଣଙ୍କର ପ୍ରସ୍ତାବନୀୟ ଏଇ ଭଗବତ-ଗୀତା ବ୍ରହ୍ମସୂତ୍ର ଏବଂ ବେଦ ଉପରେ ଏଇଟା ଗୋଟେ ଆଧୁନିକ ଦାର୍ଶନିକ ପକ୍ଷେ ଏଇଟା ଗୋଟେ ଭାରି ମହାନ ସୃଷ୍ଟି ଏବଂ ତା ସହିତ ସେ ନିଜର ଦର୍ଶନକୁ ଯେଉଁଠି ସୂତ୍ରାୟିତ କରି ପ୍ରଦାନ କରିଛନ୍ତି ଆଇଡିଆଲିଷ୍ଟ ଭ୍ୟୁ ଅଫ୍ ଲାଇଫ୍, ଏହା ସହିତ ମଧ୍ୟ ରିକଭରି ଅଫ୍ ଫେଥ୍। ଏବଂ ଏଇ ଯେଉଁ ଆଇଡିଆଲିଷ୍ଟ ଭ୍ୟୁ ଅଫ୍ ଲାଇଫ୍, ସେ ଯେଉଁ ଆଇଡିଆଲଟା କ'ଣ ଯେ ପ୍ରକୃତରେ ଯେ ଏଇ ଜଗତଟି ବ୍ରହ୍ମ ସହିତ ବ୍ରହ୍ମ ଜଗତରେ ରହିଛନ୍ତି ଆଉ କେବଳ ଆତ୍ମା ଜୀବାତ୍ମା ଆଉ ପରମାତ୍ମା ସେ କେବଳ ସଂଯୁକ୍ତ ନାହାନ୍ତି। ଏଇ ଯେଉଁ ପୃଥିବୀ ଏଇ ଯେଉଁ ୱାର୍ଲଡ ସେଇଟା ମଧ୍ୟ ଏକ ବ୍ରହ୍ମଙ୍କର ସୃଷ୍ଟି। ଏଇଟା ଗୋଟେ ଭାରି ମହତ୍ୱପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ଚିନ୍ତନ। ଆଉ କାହିଁକି ଆମେ ଅନେକ ସମୟରେ ଯେଉଁ ମିଥ୍ୟା ଏବଂ ମାୟାର ପ୍ରକୃତରେ ଏକ ଗଭୀର ଆବେଦନ କରିଛୁ। ସେଇ ଦୃଷ୍ଟିରୁ ଶ୍ରୀ ଶଙ୍କରାଚାର୍ଯ୍ୟ ଯେଉଁ କହିଛନ୍ତି ବ୍ରହ୍ମ ସତ୍ୟ ଜଗତ ମିଥ୍ୟା, ମିଥ୍ୟାଟା ପ୍ରକୃତରେ ଗୋଟେ ଆମନ୍ତ୍ରଣ, ଯେଉଁ ଗୋଟେ ଆବରଣ ରହିଛି ତାକୁ ତା ଭିତରେ ପ୍ରବେଶ କରି ସତ୍ୟକୁ ଖୋଜିବା ପାଇଁ ଏକ ଆଗରଣ। ଏଇଟା ଗୋଟେ ସାଧାରଣ ଦୃଷ୍ଟିରୁ ଏହା ନୁହେଁ ଯେ ଜଗତ ମିଥ୍ୟା ଏବଂ ଜଗତ ବ୍ରହ୍ମ ରହିତ, ଏହା ନୁହେଁ। ଏବଂ ଶ୍ରୀ ରାଧାକୃଷ୍ଣନ ମଧ୍ୟ ଡକ୍ଟର ରାଧାକୃଷ୍ଣନ ମଧ୍ୟ ଯେଉଁ ବ୍ରହ୍ମ ଆଉ ଆମର ସଂସାରରେ ବ୍ରହ୍ମ ରହିଛନ୍ତି ସେଇଟା ଗୋଟେ ଭାରି ମହତ୍ୱପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ଆମନ୍ତ୍ରଣ ଆମକୁ ଅନୁଭବ କରିବାକୁ। ଏବଂ ଆମେ ଏବେ ଦେଖୁଛୁ ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ସମାଜ ଆଉ ସଂସ୍କୃତି ବିଷୟରେ ଯେଉଁ ସବୁ ଆଲୋଚନା ଘଟୁଛି ଆଉ ସମାଜ ତତ୍ତ୍ୱବିତ୍ ମାନେ ଧୀରେ ଧୀରେ ସୋସାଇଟି ଗୋଟେ ସମାଜ କେବଳ ଗୋଟେ ମେଟେରିଆଲ ର ଭୂମି ନୁହଁ, କେବଳ ଆମର କ୍ଷମତା କାମନା ବାସନାର ଏକ ଗନ୍ତାଘର ନୁହେଁ। ଆମର ସମାଜ ଏବଂ ସଂସ୍କୃତି ଭିତରେ ମଧ୍ୟ ଗୋଟେ ଉଚ୍ଚତର ଚେତନା କାମ କରୁଛି। ଅନେକ ସମୟରେ କେତେବେଳେ ସେଇଟା ଅଧିକ ଭଲ ଭାବରେ ପ୍ରକଟିତ ହୋଇଯାଉଛି, କେତେବେଳେ ସେଇଟା ହୋଇଯାଉଛି, କିନ୍ତୁ ସମାଜ ଏବଂ ସଂସ୍କୃତି ଗୋଟେ ଉଚ୍ଚତର ଚେତନା ଠାରୁ ବିବର୍ଜିତ ନୁହେଁ। ଏଇଟା ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ସମାଜ ବିଜ୍ଞାନୀ ମାନେ କହିବାକୁ ଆରମ୍ଭ କଲେ। ତେଣୁ ଏଇ ଦୃଷ୍ଟିରୁ ଆମର ସଂସାରର ଯେଉଁ ସ୍ଥିତି ତାକୁ ଗୋଟେ ବ୍ରହ୍ମ ସ୍ଥିତି ଭାବରେ ଅନୁଭବ କରିବା। ଏହା ସହିତ ଡକ୍ଟର ରାଧାକୃଷ୍ଣ ତାଙ୍କର ଯେଉଁ ବେଦାନ୍ତ, ଯେ ବେଦାନ୍ତ ହେଉଛି ଭାରତୀୟ ଧର୍ମର ସାର, ତା ସହିତ ସମଗ୍ର ଧର୍ମ ଯେଉଁ ଏସଣାର ସାର ସେଇଟା ହେଉଛି ବଡ଼ କଥା। ଏବଂ ଏହା ସହିତ ସେ ଆମର ଧର୍ମ କେମିତି ତା ଭିତରେ ଏକ ଉଚ୍ଚତର ଦାର୍ଶନିକତା ରହିଛି ଏବଂ ଦର୍ଶନ ଭିତରେ ଗୋଟେ ଉଚ୍ଚତର ଧର୍ମ ଧାରଣା ରହିଛି। ଧର୍ମ ଏବଂ ଦର୍ଶନ ତାକୁ ସେ ଭାରି ପାଖାପାଖି ତାକୁ ଅନୁଭବ କରିବାକୁ ଆମକୁ ଆହ୍ୱାନ ଦେଇଛନ୍ତି। ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ତାଙ୍କର ଭାରି ବଡ଼ କଣ୍ଟ୍ରିବ୍ୟୁସନ୍ସ ହେଉଛି, ବିଶେଷ କରି ଆମେ ଯେଉଁମାନେ ଭାରତୀୟ ବିଚାରର ଆମେ ନିବେଦନ କରୁ ସେହି ସମୟରେ ଆମ ଭିତରେ ଅନ୍ୟ ଧର୍ମ ପ୍ରତି ସେତେ ବେଶୀ ଆଗ୍ରହ ନଥାଏ। କିନ୍ତୁ ଯେଉଁ କଥା ସ୍ୱାମୀ ବିବେକାନନ୍ଦ କରିଥିଲେ रामकृष्ण परमहंस एवं स्वामी विवेकानंद आ स्वामी विवेकानंदଙ୍କର ଖ୍ରୀଷ୍ଟ ଧର୍ମ ସହିତ जो एक गभीर आध्यात्मिक यात्रा थी एवं प्रोफेसर प्रधानଙ୍କର କହିବାରେ जे डॉक्टर राधाकृष्णन अनेक ख्रिस्टियन डगमा को एक गभीर दार्शनिक भूमि प्रदान करते एवं एटा गोटे भारी जुगान्तकारी कंट्रीब्यूशन मोर मन पड़ुची एथि जेतबे 1936 रे एसके जॉर्ज जने फिलोसोफर जे लेखिले गांधी चैलेंज टू क्रिश्चियनिटी एवं सेइथकाई तांकु ख्रीष्ट धर्मरु अनेक निर्यातना सहिबाकु पड़िला तार मुखबंधरे डॉक्टर राधाकृष्णन लिखिछन भारी गभीर कथा से कहते ख्रीस्टियन धर्म एवं दर्शन जो आरंभ होता एवं से यात्रा पथरे जिते ख्रीष्ट धर्म ग्रीक दर्शन सहित जो डायलॉग आरंभ करता ख्रीष्ट धर्म को गोटे नूतन पथ दे हमीज कि वर्तमान सेटा एमती एक ये भितर बांधी हो जाए गोटे बंधन भितर बांधी हो जाए ताकू ओपन अप करने आउ गोटे नूतन दार्शनिक कथा आवश्यक होची वेदांत एवं तेणु वेदांत केमिति ख्रीष्ट धर्म को तार निजर विवर्तन धारा एक सहायक जननी हिसाब से काम कर डॉक्टर राधाकृष्णन भारी गभीर कथा आम देखा वर्तमान जदि the development in Christian theology, how important mysticism has been, Bhagavad-Gita has been, and also the works of great Christian seekers like Swami Abhisiktananda, and who came and stayed in South India. He met Ramana Maharshi, and he journeyed with both Lord Jesus Christ and Vedanta and Shiva Tantra is so deep. And so, eta hochi Dr. Radhakrishnan kara, जोगोटा प्रोफेसर प्रधान कथा से व्याख्या करी कहूँ तेणु यही सब सहित डॉक्टर राधाकृष्णन मूल कथा थिला जे आमर जो मनुष्यर जो विज्ञान रही धर्म रही फिलोसफी रही समस्ते केमिति परस्पर पाखक आसबे एवं मानव समाज जो भविष्य सेटा निर्भर करुच्ची आमर एक आध्यात्मिक जागरण एवं से कहते गोटे अनबोर्न सोल ऑफ द वर्ल्ड एपर्यंत जन्म नहीं नए गोटे आत्माटी आम भितर जन्म नापी अपेक्षा कर दृष्टि श्री अरविंदर कथा मन पड़ जाए भारी प्रेरणादायक जे प्रोफेसर प्रधान व्याख्यान श्री अरविंद को आम पाखक आनी श्री अरविंद डॉक्टर राधाकृष्णन एवं जो निय वेदांतर कथा यहाँ मोर now with gratitude to Professor Pradhan and also to Professor Agarwala. So I invite Professor Agarwala to kindly speak. Please,
sir, you have to unmute yours.
I'm not very conversant in this. I thank Professor Giri for inviting me to say something regarding the philosophy of Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, who was our former vice president and also known great philosopher of Indian philosophy, and also a very good teacher in many of the Indian university. Like BHU and other places. So it's really a pleasure for me to join in this Zoom meeting with all of you. And I thank the organizers of this program also for giving me this opportunity. Professor Pradhan, he has outlined the general principles of Dr. Radhakrishnan's philosophy. So I will not go into these general principles. Let me say that Dr. Radhakrishnan and other modern commentators on Indian philosophy or the various texts of Indian philosophy they were writing during the independence struggle when we were already, say, ruled by the British, and our goal was to get emancipated from the British rule. And since the British rulers, they justified their rule by saying that they have brought the gift of civilization to India, and India needs it very badly because the Indians are not that very civilized. They do not have the high standard literature as the West has, or they do not have high standard philosophy as the West has. And at that time, many thinkers like Radhakrishnan, Ranade, Das Gupta, and others, they started pointing out and writing about and on Indian philosophy, that our philosophy is no less than the Western philosophy. And they started comparing the Indian philosophy with Western philosophy, like, say, Bhagavad-Gita was compared with Kant, and the Vedantic tradition was compared with the idealistic philosophy of the Western, tradition. So that was the context. And for this, we have to be really thankful, and we have to remember Dr. Radhakrishnan, that he was more than successful, that he popularized Indian philosophy not only in Indian universities and got, say, Indian philosophy courses introduced in the philosophy departments in India, but also he popularized Indian philosophy in the Western world and in the Western universities, and he held important positions there, as was pointed out by Professor Pradhan. So that was a great service. Today, I received a message with a very interesting say comment by one of my friends. That was the Teachers' Day greeting, and he wrote, a teacher's purpose is not to create students in his own image, but to develop students who can create their own images. Now, definitely the image that Dr. Radhakrishnan had was of someone, say, trying to come up to the Western standards, and gave the image for the Indian student that they should learn Indian philosophy as good as they are learning Western philosophy, and also see the comparison between the two. But our world is now a little different. We are no more struggling with the West, and we are actually now claiming that we are also say, a superpower. At least that is what the politicians are telling us. But anyway, what is important for us is that now we can speak with little more self-confidence about ourselves, and also can have a little microscopic look at our own tradition and the interpretation of our own tradition, which was not done so much by the traditional thinkers like Radhakrishnan, Ranade, or Das Gupta, or others. So, to come out of this traditionalist image, which was generally prevalent among the students of Indian philosophy, I tried to project a little different image. That is, let us have a critical look at the Indian tradition. And this opportunity was given to me on the 31st day itself, 31st of August itself, because Indian Council of Philosophical Research, it held a lecture program, and the title, surprisingly, though it was discussed today also by Dr. Pradhan, was The Role of the Bhagavad-Gita in the Prasthana Trayi. And I was also one of the speakers. And there, instead of just following what the propounders of Prasthana Trayi or the interpreters of Prasthana Trayi, like the Vedantic thinkers say, advocated, I looked little minutely at least the three advocates of Vedantic philosophy, that choosing one from each, that is Shankaracharya, then Ramanujacharya, and Madhvacharya. Of course, I didn't get the time to say examine Nimbark or Ballabha, but at least three I examined, and I selected some of the verses they have commented on from Bhagavad-Gita, and tried to examine whether they really could interpret these Indian texts. And remember, these Indian texts, they are the medieval thinkers, later medieval thinkers, and this text is coming from the ancient times, specifically, say, Bhagavad-Gita. It is coming from at least prior to 250 BC, somewhere around Panini's time, and not later than that. But how far we can go, I do not know. But generally, it is put in between 500 BC to 250 BC. So it is a very old text. And this old text was interpreted by these thinkers in the medieval period. And I somehow found that they are grasp of the syntax of the verse and the semantics of the terms were really not adequate, because they do not come out, they do not bring out the subject matter of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, with that spirit, I am also examining, say, Dr. Radhakrishnan's, say, book on, say, Bhagavad Gita, which is a translation. That is, Radhakrishnan published the Bhagavad Gita under the title The Bhagavad Gita, with an introductory essay, Sanskrit text, English translation, and notes. Radhakrishnan translation of and notes on the Bhagavad Gita, at least in my assessment, do not reflect correctly the understanding of the Sanskrit verses and the semantics of the terms. That is what I concluded. He has merely blindly followed the traditional commentators without bothering to pay due scholarly attention to the text of the Bhagavad Gita, which he is translating and commenting on. And I expect that someone of his stature, holding the position of, say, professor, will definitely examine the earlier commentaries and not just follow, but also compare the Sanskrit words and their reflections on that, and then he will come up. But that is not how it is there in Radhakrishnan's work. He is translating and commenting, that is Bhagavad Gita, but just blindly following this traditional, say, thinkers. And here I select just a few, say, verses from Bhagavad Gita, which I think very popular, and I think everybody must be aware of these verses. First verse I have selected is Bhagavad Gita 1:10. That is, Aparyaptam tad asmakam balam bhisma virakhitam paryaptam tvi idam etesam balam bhima virakhitam. And Radhakrishnan is translating this: unlimited is this army of ours, which is guarded by Bhisma, while that army of theirs, which is guarded by Bhima, is limited. Actually, the word that he is translating as unlimited. The Bhisma's army, or the say Kaurava army, is unlimited. He is actually aparyaptam. Now, in Sanskrit lexicon, aparyaptam is never unlimited. It is insufficient. That is how inadequate and insufficient. These are the standard meaning. And similarly, paryaptam, the Bhima's army, that is Pandava army, that is paryaptam. That is, say, sufficient and adequate. That is what the verse says. But this is contrary to epic fact. Bhagavad Gita is presenting in this sloka something in the mouth of Duryodhana. This 1:10 is spoken by Duryodhana, and this is contrary to the epic facts, because Duryodhana had 11 Akshayani, say, army, while Pandavas had merely 7 Akshayani army. And Duryodhana, he is always given to boast, and he was always self-confident. So he could not have said regarding his own army that it is inadequate, aparyaptam, or that Bhima's army or Pandava army, that is say paryaptam, that is sufficient or adequate. So to get over this little say problem, that this is contrary to the spirit of how Duryodhana thinks, and this is contrary to the epic facts. How can Bhagavad-Gita say this? So they try to either reformulate the entire verse, and there is a tradition like this Kashmir tradition, like say Abhinavagupta, the Bhagavad-Gita, on which he comments, there he has corrected that he has removed where Bhishma is there, he has put Bhima, and where say Bhima is there, he has put Bhishma, so that it conforms to the epic facts. But everybody does not agree with the change of the words of the traditional text like Bhagavad-Gita. So what do? They just give whatever meaning suits to the epic fact. And that is how it was done by, say, Radhakrishnan. And he is also following, there is a tradition where this was done by others also before, say, him. So this is my problem, that instead of just blindly following, we have to really pay sufficient attention to the words, and we have to be aware that why Veda-vyasa, he knew his Mahabharata, after all he is the author of Mahabharata, yet he is putting an erroneous statement in the very opening scene of Bhagavad-Gita in the mouth of Duryodhana. There is a significance of this. This is not the only error that has been put in the mouth of speaker. There are two other errors in the mouth of Duryodhana. And not only that, another speaker, another say hero of this entire first chapter, and in the scene of the first chapter, that is Arjuna. There are three errors, and they are equally matched on two sides, because this particular chapter consists of 47 verses, and the first say 23 is putting something in the upbeat mood, and the next say after this 24th verse, another 23, they are put in little say gloomy mood of Arjuna, and Arjuna also making three errors when he is making statement. I will not go into the details. Similarly, Duryodhana also is making three errors. Now this matched three errors. Now that is important. Unless we understand why Veda-vyasa is putting this kind of erroneous statement in the mouth of the important protagonist in this entire Bhagavad-Gita, or even in the entire Mahabharata, how can we really hope to fathom what the Bhagavad-Gita's subject matter is, or how the argument is going to proceed further? Now, that is my problem. And this is somehow I take some kind of my say comment on the entire Indian tradition, especially the Vedantic who followed Prasthanatrayi. They have not paid sufficient attention. Even take, for example, Shankaracharya, he did not comment on the first 57 verses at all, because he could not handle that. It was impossible for him. The first chapter, he did not comment, and 2:1 to 2:10, he did not comment. His commentary begins at 2:11. The Vedantic, they cannot really do justice to this 57 verses, the beginning 57 verses of the Bhagavad-Gita. 47 first chapter and 10 verses in the second chapter. So that is little problematic, and we have to be little careful when we are, say, reading the translation and comments and commentaries by the traditional thinkers. Now, let me come to another very, very important, say, verse, and which all of us, I think, know of, and I think they must have recited also. That is Bhagavad-Gita 2:13. Dehino asmin yatha dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namuyati. And the translation of Radhakrishnan says, as the soul passes in this body through childhood, youth and age, even so is its taking on of another body. The sage is not perplexed by this. Now, I comment on this. Radhakrishnan translation is correct. And he is referring, he is drawing attention to Vishnu Smriti, and there he goes wrong. Actually, not that he is wrong in referring to Vishnu Smriti, because Vishnu Smriti is quoting Bhagavad-Gita for its own purposes and trying to interpret it as transmigration of soul. That means the way it is interpreted by Radhakrishnan, by reference to Vishnu Smriti, he is also interpret, in spite of having correctly translated the verse, he is interpreting it as transmigration of soul. Now that is problematic, that this is regarding transmigration of soul. This is not regarding transmigration of soul. Let us look a little more carefully in the words that are given and the comparison that is given. The first line says, Dehino asmin yatha dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara. The embodied, the way it experiences, that is this kaumaram, that is youth, and the childhood, the youth, and the old days.
Yeah.
Same way, this embodied experiences transition from one body to another. Now, what is this in this body transition from childhood to youth to old age signify? What is this comparison hold? Is it merely transition? It is not merely transition. It is a continuous transition without a demarcating line. That continuity is there. One does not know when it is always arbitrary. And we are still struggling. What is the marriage age? When the childhood ends and the youth begins. Some say 13, some say 14, some say 15, 18, 19, 20, 21, and even beyond. And similarly, when is one say old? After 50, after 60, after 65, after 85. It is a continuous transition. There is no demarcating line. So that continuity. Now, is there any self whose body transition is continuous like this? Secondly, can there be a body without any state, childhood, youth, or old age? There cannot be a body. There is no question of ontological separation of a body from the state of the body, whether it is childhood or youth or old age. That means what this verse is indicating, there is no question of ontological separation of the so-called self, the dehin, from the deha. That is what it is saying. That if it is not with one say body, then it is with another body. It is always with body. It is not without body. That's why the word that is used is not self, atman. The word that is used is dehin. Dehino asmin yatha. Dehin is always with the body. It can never be without body. Now, these two requirements, that some say embodied, which is not ever without a body, and whose body is transforming even from one to the other continuously. What is that self? Can it be Jivatman? Cannot be the individual self. Now, there cannot be any individual self whose, say, after death, he will get another body, from one body to another body. No individual can really pass. And Indian philosophers were not foolish enough to advocate any such thing at all. Read any of the older texts. It is only after the advent of the Samanika tradition, that is your, say, Jaina and the Buddhist, that this idea has come up. It is not a Brahmanic tradition. This is not Vedic tradition. And Bhagavad-Gita is firmly rooted in the Vedic tradition. It is not advocating any kind of ontological separation of body from the Atman, or say transmigration of self from one body to another. Then what is this self? What is this Dehin? Who is this Dehin? Who has this kind of say continuity in transition at the same time in separation? Now this is nothing but think of some institution, whether it is university, whether it is state, which is a collective person. Remember, in the legal parlance, it is a collective person. And the body of this collective person, that is the body politic, is continuously changing. The population is continuously changing. Body politic is continuously changing. And there cannot be a collective self without any kind of collective body. So this is what the gist is. And in fact, Bhagavad-Gita is very much in favor of this collective body, Sahasra Sirsa Purusa, that is face everywhere, the mouth everywhere, hands everywhere, etc., etc. That is stated many times in Bhagavad-Gita. And this is coming from our Rig Veda, and that Purusa Sukta. And in this Purusa Sukta, that is an advocacy of a collective person, the Yajna Purusa, which is a collective person, not an individual person. There is no question of dismemberment of the individual. It is only the collective self which is distinguished into so many say things. So actually, I did not go into the details of the exegesis of the traditional text like say Rig Veda, but let me just mention one point. This division between Astika and Nastika, this is actually coming from pre-Panini's Vyakarana time. This Astika and Nastika, that word was already there before. And at that time, this Astika Nastika referred not whether somebody is an adherent of Veda or not an adherent of Veda or accepted the authority of Veda. Rather, it was based on whether they accepted Purusa or they did not accept Purusa. And Purusa means here the collective person. The Shramanic tradition, whether it was Jaina or whether it was say Buddhist, they did not accept this individual, this collective person. They were against collective person. They were individualists. That's why this law of karma is advocated by them, because law of karma applies to the individual self, not to the collective self. So Shramanic tradition, they accepted the individualism and the transmigration of the individual soul to reap the consequences of the action which were attributed to them or which they have performed. But the original Vedic tradition or the Brahmanic tradition, which is followed by Bhagavad-Gita, they did not accept any such individualistic conception or attribution except say action to the individual. They were only trying to outline this collective person and the collective action. Yajna karma was always a collective action. A yajmana was someone and the purohit was someone else, and yet it was a totality of action, not individuated action. Rather, they were one. Anyway, let me not go into say further details. Then let me come to another very, very important say verse. That is Bhagavad-Gita 2:16. That states a metaphysical principle. Hello. I hope I am audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible. Carry on.
Yeah, you are very much audible, sir.
Bhagavad-Gita 2:16, it says, Na asato vidyate bhava, na abhava vidyate satah, ubhayor api drishto antastvi anayas tattvadarshibhi. And I give Radhakrishnan's translation of the non-existent, there is no coming to be. Of the existent, there is no ceasing to be. The conclusion about these two has been perceived by the seers of truth. Now, this is a total, say, untruth attributed by way of translation to Bhagavad-Gita, because Bhagavad-Gita could not have stated something like this untruth. The non-existent, there is no coming to be. Non-existent person comes into existence. Non-existent fetus comes into existence. It comes into the Garbha. And similarly, the child comes into existence. Tree sprout. It was not existent before, but it has come into existence. So the non-existent, there is no coming to be, is actually a false statement attributed to Bhagavad-Gita. Similarly, of the existent, there is no ceasing to be. As if something that is existent, it cannot go out of existence. Well, that is what the Sadbhara Vikaras are there. That something that comes into being, and then it is in existence, then it increases, then it changes, then it say apachiyate, that is, it decreases, and then it goes out of existence. These are the sadbhava vikaras. So the existent actually goes out of existence. And what is not existent, that comes to be, comes into existence, that is birth. So this is actually turning the metaphysical principle that is stated in Bhagavad-Gita 2.16 into a total falsehood. And we don't even notice that this is a falsehood that is being attributed. Actually, this Bhagavad-Gita 2.16 is advocating a very, very important metaphysical principle. Recently, I published one essay on this 2.16. And that is actually 43 pages long, very long essay, because I have to deal with this entire history of interpretation, both Eastern and Western, and then give my say analysis of what the terms actually mean here. The important words are asat, bhava, abhava, and sat. Now, somehow all the thinkers, sat, asat, the distinction, and bhava, abhava distinction, they are equated and put together in one way or the other. Either they are reduced to say speaking of say tautology, or something like total contradiction, like say Radhakrishnan. I have examined the entire tradition. That means these two different distinctions, sat, asat, and bhav, abhav, this distinction was not understood by the traditional thinkers from medieval onwards till the modern times. These are different distinctions. Sat, asat, and bhav, abhav, they are not to be equated. Sat, asat, bhav, abhav, they are not to be equated with astitva or going out of astitva. Because astitva, as I have already explained, this is bhava vikara, this is not bhava. Bhava and vikaras, they are different. Though they are vikaras of the bhava, yet bhava and vikara, they are different. Vikara, existence is a vikara of the bhava, and it can go out of existence, make a transition, and this non-existent, it can become and still retain bhava. Bhava can, something that is bhava can become non-existent. But similarly, this sat and asat, that is a different distinction. This bhav, abhav actually is a, this is the alternative without any kind of, say, middle. They're mutually exclusive. If something has bhava, then there is no abhava, and if there is abhava, then there can be no bhava. While sat and asat, these are ethico-ontological categories. There are nothing like pure ethical categories in Indian tradition, because the ethics, ontology, epistemology, these were not distinguished in Indian tradition, or at least in Indian, say, darsana, or the say Brahmanic tradition of the Vedic tradition. So I use the term this ethico-ontological categories. This sat is something that is good, that is eternal, and that is actual. Not real, actual. Actual has something to do with the action. It manifests only through the action. It doesn't manifest otherwise. That's why it is actual, actuality. It refers to actuality, not to reality, the rest in the Western tradition. Similarly, this abhava, that is nothing. But non-existence is not nothing. Something that is existent can go out of existence, and yet it retains its bhava. So Anyway, I will not go into the details. What I wanted to point out by this translation, say quoting this translation from Radhakrishnan translation, is that how he has turned a metaphysical principle into a falsehood. The metaphysical principle says that which is asat cannot have bhav, and that which is sat, there cannot be abhav. That means this asat and bhav cannot be combined together into one. And similarly, these two different predicates, that is, say, sat and abhav, they cannot be combined because sat is eternal, so there is no abhav of it. And something like asat, there is no bhava of it. But remember, even though this appears to be as of equal standing, that asat has no bhava and sat has no abhava, they are of different scope, because later on in Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna will say that sat asat cha aham. If I remember correctly, it is 9:19. 9th chapter, 19th verse, we will say sat asat cha aham. And when he is sat and asat, that means there is a bhava of sat and asat together. And yet, Bhagavad-Gita is stating as a metaphysical principle that asat has no bhava, but sat and asat had bhava. That means asat only when combined with sat has bhava, but by itself it doesn't have say bhava. But sat by itself can have bhava, but it will not be manifest. I have to go into the entire Vedic tradition and all the uses of sat and asat, then only I'll be able to show that only when the sat is with asat, then only it is manifest. Otherwise, it is a bhava. There is no abhava, yet it is not manifest. It is not available to perception, to darsana, or to any of the pramanas. So that's why the importance of this distinction of sat, asat, and bhava, abhava. We have to keep this in mind. And this bhava has also something to say do with this say action. Bhava pradhanam akyatam. The grammar is not, the grammatical categories of bhava is not different from, not away from this metaphysical principle. Let me, have I exceeded the time? Please tell me, should I continue? Because should I continue or should I stop? Have I consumed my time?
You can continue.
Clear my question.
Maybe Professor Agarwal, maybe another 5 minutes, please. If it
Okay.
is okay.
So I will just give one more example. That is the last verse that I will like to comment, though I could have commented on many other verses. I think all of you are say familiar with the 15th chapter. This Urdhamula Adha Sakham Prahur Abhyayam. It goes something like this. The 15th from verse 1. It says, Urdhamulam Adha Sakam Aswatham Prahur Abhyayam. That is what is important for me. And then let me go to the second verse. It says, Adhascha Mulani Anusantatani Karmanubandhani Manusyaloke. That is the second line of the verse 2. And this third verse, it says, Na Rupam Asya Tatho Upalabhyate. Na anto na cha adir na cha sampratishta aswatham enam suviruda moolam asanga sastrena dridhena chitta. Now, the controversial line for me is the translation of last of 15:3. That is aswatham enam suviruda moolam asanga sastrena dridhena chitta. Now, let me give the translation of this by Radhakrishnan. Having cut off this firm-rooted aswatham, people tree, with strong sword of non-attachment. But remember, in the first verse itself, it was said that this aswatham, urdhamulam aswatham, Prahur Abhyayam. It is Abhyaya. It is spoken of as Abhyaya. And something that is Abhyaya, there is no question of cutting it off. Metaphysically, it is impossible. Similarly, when you look at the syntax of this particular, line, that is Aswatham Enam Suviruda Moolam Asanga Sastrena Dridena Chitva. This Chitva is the verb. And this verb requires a karma karaka. And there are two karma karakas. That is Aswatham and Suviruda Moolam. Now, which is the real karma karaka and which is the qualifier of the karma karaka? Now, the ordinary Sanskrit Vyakarana tells every student that the karma karaka nearest to the verb, especially on the left, that is the main karma karaka. And another term which is in the Dvitiya Vibhakti karma karaka, that is actually the qualifier of the first karma karaka, the main karma karaka. Now here let us read the sequence. Aswatham enam sviruda moolam. And then chitva, the verb. That means chitva must go with the sviruda moolam. And this sviruda moolam is not urdha moolam. Because question of cutting that doesn't arise. Urdha moolam. Then which is Suviruda Moolam? Suviruda Moolam are this Adhascha Moolani Anusantatani Karmanubandhani Manusya Loke. Because they are the Suviruda. Suviruda means intertwined. And which roots get intertwined? That is actually this downward growing tree, roots of the Aswatha tree or the people tree, or the fig tree or the banyan tree. It is not the main root that never intertwines, that actually spreads all around and goes deeper. So, Suviruda Moolam refers to this Karma Bandhani roots, and it is only the Karma Bandhani roots which has to be cut. And Karma Bandhani roots of what? Aswatham. That's why Aswatham Enam Suviruda Moolam Asanga Sastrena Dridhena Chitva. So that is how it should have been interpreted. And I have seen in the entire Indian tradition, only one thinker has got his syntax of the verse correct. And that is Abhinava Gupta of the Saiva philosophy. He has got his syntax correct, and he clearly interprets in his Bhagavad-Gita Grantha Sara. Just 1 second, phone is coming. रुपेश जी मैं थोड़ी देर में बात करता हूं आपसे, अभी मीटिंग में हूं, मैं एक मीटिंग में हूं. Just a second. So only Abhinav Gupta has got his syntax of the verse correct, and he clearly takes Chitva with the Suviruda Moolam and not with the Aswattha, and he has interpreted accordingly. And I think he is right, as I have already tried to show. So these are some of my this micro analysis of the presentation of the traditional text by say thinkers like Radhakrishnan and also many others. So anyway, this is say Teachers' Day celebration. So I am celebrating by looking a little more closely at our great teacher of Indian philosophy. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Professor Agarwala. And it has been such a deep journey. And I think the best tribute to Dr. Radhakrishnan is to work with him and a kind of what can be called a truthful hermeneutics. And in your work, you really build on so many traditions of thinking, and especially Abhinava Gupta and language. And so therefore the sense of critique is so significant. And in fact, on the Teachers' Day, that path of critique is so important to cultivate, critique creativity. So maybe I would just also take a few minutes to translate it into Odia. We have some friends who have joined in the meantime. ଆଉ ଆମର ଭାଇ ଭଉଣୀ ମାନେ ଆମ ସାଙ୍ଗରେ ପ୍ରଫେସର ବିନୋଦ କୁମାର ଅଗ୍ରୱାଲ ଅଛନ୍ତି, ଆଉ ସେ ମଧ୍ୟ ଓଡ଼ିଶାରୁ, ଏବଂ ଜଣେ ଗଭୀର ଦାର୍ଶନିକ ଏବଂ ସିଏ ତାଙ୍କର ଯେଉଁ କହିଲେ ଯେ ଆମେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଡକ୍ଟର ରାଧାକୃଷ୍ଣନଙ୍କୁ ତାଙ୍କର ଦର୍ଶନକୁ ବୁଝିବାକୁ ଚେଷ୍ଟା କରିବା, ବିଶେଷ କରି ଭଗବତ ଗୀତାର ଯେଉଁ ସେ ଅନୁବାଦ କରିଛନ୍ତି ଏବଂ ଅନୁବାଦ ସହିତ ଯେଉଁ ବ୍ୟାଖ୍ୟା କରିଛନ୍ତି, ସେଥିରେ କଣ କଣ ପ୍ରକାର ଯେ ଅନୁବାଦରେ କଣ ପ୍ରକାର ଆହ୍ୱାନ ସବୁ ରହିଛି। ସେ କହୁଛନ୍ତି ଯେ ଅନୁବାଦ ଗୁଡାକ ଆଉ ସେ ମାନେ ଗୀତାରେ ଯାହା ହେଇଛି ଲେଖା ଯାଇଛି ସେଟା ହୁଏତ ଠିକ ଯଥାର୍ଥ ଭାବରେ ହେଇପାରିନି, ଯେମିତି ଅସତ୍ ଅଭାବ, ସତ୍ ଅଭାବ, ଏଇ ଯେଉଁ ସବୁ ଉଦାହରଣ ଦେଲେ। ତେଣୁ ଭାରି ଗଭୀର କଥାଟି ସେ କହିଲେ ଆଉ କେମିତି ଆମେ ଡକ୍ଟର ରାଧାକୃଷ୍ଣନଙ୍କୁ ବୁଝିବା, ଆଉ ସେଇଟା ହେଉଛି ସଂକ୍ଷେପରେ ପ୍ରଫେସର ଅଗ୍ରୱାଲ। Now let us embrace questions, comments and thoughts, and so I welcome you to share. So in the meantime, to initiate the conversation, in fact, the issues that Professor Agarwala has raised, maybe Professor Pradhan also as a deep scholar of language, he can kindly share some thoughts on this. And to add to that, I also wish to offer a few queries. Now, Dr. Radhakrishnan, for example, his whole idealistic view of life, and maybe he is referring to Bradley and others, but also one thinks the whole philosophical movement of that time had a deep presence of Edmund Husserl, and in some ways that Husserl also pointing to certain kind of ideal. And so if there was any conversation between, any reflection from Dr. Radhakrishnan on Edmund Husserl, for example, and if any. Secondly, in philosophy of language also, as both Professor Pradhan and Professor Agarwal have worked on linguistic philosophy, especially Wittgenstein and Martin Heidegger. In fact, Professor Pradhan has written a very important work interpreting Wittgenstein's, Tractus Philosophicus, and he, in fact, maybe Professor Pradhan also has followed a little bit of Vedantic stream to understand Wittgenstein. So it is in that spirit. Now, as a student of language and linguistic philosophy, what might be possible conversation between Dr. Radhakrishnan and Wittgenstein, for example. And the same question query can be submitted to Professor Agarwal, who also has been a keen student of Martin Heidegger, for example. For example, when we are talking about being, and whether there is possibility of conversation between Heidegger and Dr. Radhakrishnan. So with this, I invite both Professor Pradhan and Professor Agarwal to kindly continue this dialogue, and then we would have questions and conversations further.
Okay, so can I come to your first question, Professor Giri? First of all, Radhakrishnan was very much conversant with the idealist philosophers of his time. For example, somewhere in his My Search for Truth, he writes, he felt very, in a sense, very elevated when a comparison was made of his philosophy with that of Bosanquet. So in a sense, he was very much in line of thinking of the British idealist of his time. But apart from that, since he was very much conversant with the other streams of thought in the Western horizon, like
yes,
like pragmatism, like for example, other systems which were running parallel at that time. He was commenting on them also, responding to them. But his agreement was with the idealist, that I can see from his book, An Idealist View of Life. For example, he refers to the emergent evolution of Samuel Alexander and others, though he doesn't agree with them because they were naturalist or very much not idealist proper. So he veered towards idealism. So this is, so in a sense, he was in a sense, in dialogue with the idealists. But he had also acquaintance with Husserl, because somewhere in his writings, I find his mention of Husserl, who also propounds a way of understanding consciousness. So Husserl was very much closer to idealism, though many say he was an idealist himself, though there are others who say he's a realist. But it is the idealist Husserl which must have appealed to Radhakrishnan. So when he comments on consciousness, he finds that phenomenology has already come to that point which Vedanta has already arrived at. That is, consciousness is a fundamental reality of the universe, and our philosophy must journey through consciousness, and perhaps it will, the beginning will be a philosophical journey, will be consciousness, and also will be consciousness, though it will be of the absolute consciousness, as he talks about the absolute spirit. So in a sense, he appreciates Husserl's phenomenological approach. But regarding the second question, whether he was in a happy relation with the analytic thinkers like Wittgenstein, Russell, and others, they were almost his contemporaries. But as I can see, his comments regarding positivism we are very negative, and so he was not in the same wavelength with the analytic thinkers, but because they had no concern about the spiritual values that he was talking about. Though personally they might be pursuing their spiritual values, like Russell, who talks about spiritual values, but in their philosophy it is not reflected. They pursue the empiricist line of thinking, which Radhakrishnan doesn't approve, because he is more with the rationalist, more with the Hegelian tradition, the British Hegelian tradition, etc., but not with the linguistic philosophers. But Wittgenstein is a different cup of tea, really, because Wittgenstein was not in the company of the British thinkers, especially the linguistic and analytic thinkers. He had his own way of thinking, which is very closer to what Radhakrishnan would have called the spiritual way of thinking. That's why his tractatus, when he talks about silence, so many will be happy to see that the silence is nothing but a mystic admission of a mystic silence, where you cannot really talk about, but you can feel, you can, because what you cannot see can be shown, or it shows itself. So in that sense, he can be happy with Radhakrishnan of the Tractatus, though occasionally he will refer to Wittgenstein, but there is no continuous conversation with him. For example, somewhere he mentions Wittgenstein's famous statement in the Tractatus: when all scientific questions are solved, nothing about life has been touched. That means scientific questions and their solutions do not really give any sense to human life. So there, really, he agrees with Wittgenstein. He says scientific questions and answers do not concern the ultimate destiny of human life. They are concerned with something else, but not with the real meaning of human life. So on that ground, he would be very happy with Wittgenstein, though there is no sustained dialogue with him, because he was so busy with bringing all the traditions together that he was no time, in a sense, to engage with a single philosopher or a single philosophical tradition. So in that sense, I can really suggest that he would have appreciated the philosophers and the philosophies which take human beings and their existence seriously. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pradhan. Now, Professor Agarwala, please.
I will like to make just two observations. One is that, as I said in the very beginning of my lecture, that the context of writing of Radhakrishnan was to show that our thought is as good as your thought. That is the Western thought. And in that sense, if there is idealism in the West, then there is idealism in the East. If there is a realism in the West, then there is a realism in the say East. If there is empiricism in the West, then there is empiricism in the East. That is Indian philosophy, that is Nyaya, and so on and so forth. That was the way of presenting the Indian philosophy. Actually, it was more trying to show that this Indian philosophy is in matching with the Western philosophy. So Western ideas definitely percolated into the very interpretation of the Indian philosophy, and now we have to be little more careful about this tendency, actually, whether these terms like materialism, realism, etc. are adequate to present the gamut of ideas that is there in the Indian tradition, or even in any one thinker like Shankaracharya, whether should we call him an idealist? Is he idealist in the same way in which say Bradley and others were idealists? Definitely, he was not an idealist in that sense. So the moment we talk of idealism, whether it is a subjective idealism or critical idealism or any other kind of idealism, and import that into say Advaita Vedanta of say Shankaracharya, then it's little problematic, because then it distorts to a very large. In fact, for me, though I myself am prone to use these general categories like Brahmanic tradition, Shramanic tradition, but still I will say when we are reading the text, then better will be to avoid this very, very say categorization and read the text in its own terms. And that is, and somehow Radhakrishnan and other say thinkers of his time and even earlier, they have not done that. Second point that I would like to make is regarding the role of language. Actually, I was surprised when I was reading Bhagavad-Gita, that is in the 10th chapter, when these vibhutis are being listed, there Krishna says, among the letters, I am a. Among the samasa, I am dvandva. I was really surprised that he is identifying himself with the linguistic elements, what we will call linguistic elements. That means we have to really understand the role of language and various elements in this entire metaphysics itself, the metaphysics of Bhagavad-Gita. And I was surprised when I back read after reading this 10th chapter with these two ideas they are present. And then I had a look at this 12th verse of the 2nd chapter, which was before 13th, and the one that I commented, that is saying, na tu eva aham jatu, na asam, na tvam, na ime janadhipa, na cha eva, na bhavishyama, sarve bayam atah param. What is important here is, first of all, there is no address. In many of the verses, Arjuna is directly addressed. But here, there is no address to Arjuna at all. That means the name, the address, that is missing. Secondly, all the words that are used to refer, they are sarvanama in the Indian tradition. That is like aham, tvam, then ime and vayam. These are the 4 sarvanamas. And see the progression. Aham, tvam, ime, the aham, tvam, they are actually say singular, and then ime, plural, this, and then vayam, that is we together. That is we all, actually. That is, so these are all sarvanama. That is important. Sarvanama. What is this sarvanama? In the Western tradition, when the pronoun is used, then there has to be an earlier reference to some noun. Then only you can use pronoun to refer to that noun, or that pronoun, noun has to come afterwards, so that the pronoun gets a reference. But in the Indian tradition, you can always state your statement in just what we will in English call pronoun, but in Indian tradition, it will be Sarvanama, and Sarvanama need not be anchored in any proper name. It can stand independently of its own. That's why Tattvamasi. Tattvamasi cannot refer to any say name whatsoever. It stands on its own. So what I want to point out is that this 12th is a total linguistic. Actually, we have to keep the language in mind. Then only we'll be able to interpret. It is not regarding the eternality of the self. It has something different. It is making a linguistic statement regarding the Sarva in this Sarvanama. And what is that representing? And it is regarding that Sarva that it is making this statement, that it could not be absent, or it was not the case that it will not be, that it is not at present, and so on and so forth. So that totality, that collectivity, which will later on come out in the, I think, 13th and 15th chapter onwards, that is important, and that is what this Sarvanama they are always referring to. And it is only through the Western idea of proper name, and when we use names, then it is through this noun that we get at that totality. So Bhagavad-Gita is definitely advocating some kind of say need for understanding the very conception of language itself. Language is not merely a means of communication as we take in the Western tradition and the Western linguistic. It is a metaphysically loaded actuality. That's why in the very grammar, Vakyapadiya of Bhartrahari, the opening statement itself is metaphysically loaded.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Agarwal. We would listen to you and both of you on another occasion. So now I invite questions, reflections, and I invite friends to kindly put it in the chat box or raise hand. And I request Randhir to kindly take a note of it. In the meanwhile, and I request that we might have to kind of sum up in 10 minutes or so. So now I request Susri Appa and then Saji and Minati to give their thoughts. And in the meantime, other friends who would like to say, please to indicate your interest in the chat box. So, or raise hand. So Susri Appa, please.
Thank you, Ananta bhai. Am I audible?
Yes, but we cannot see you.
Okay, there is not enough. The connectivity is not quite okay here. So I was actually not able to hear in between some portions. So, but I have a question, but I do not know if it is already answered or already addressed. Yeah, but before that, I'm of our speaker. I try to switch in the video, but I'm not sure whether it will be consistent after I switch in because of the poor connectivity here.
Please use the audio only.
Yeah, so I'm trying to use the audio only. So before I ask my question, my profound thanks to both our speakers. It was such a insightful, mesmerizingly insightful session, and even Professor Giri's question, which further added by the answers and explanation. Thank you so much. I have one question for Professor Agarwal, that he was referring to the original Vedanta, Vedavyasa Vedanta, where the protagonist, and he was referring to specifically that even the main protagonists like Arjunas, and so even from their mouth, in their there are not so correct statement that has been given. So if he can elaborate a little more on that. if time permits. So am I
Yes.
clear with the question, and am I audible first of all, because I am not
Yes,
very
yes.
sure, but because of the
Yes.
connectivity.
And I request Dr. Agarwal to kindly wait. We'll take all questions given the paucity of time. We'll invite you to kindly come a little later. So thank you, Appa. And now, Amruti, please. Saji, please.
Yes, good evening, sir, and happy Teachers' Day to all our teachers present there. I'm so happy to see Professor Agarwal. Thank you very much, sir, for the presentation. It's a learning experience for me. The first speaker, Professor Prasad, thank you very much. It's a learning experience for me as well from you. And the contribution that has been made by Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, I was under the impression that he rather translated much of the schools of Indian philosophy to English. But from today, from you, I came to know that he has a lot of contributions that has been made. But unfortunately, that the prominence that is given to other Indian philosophers, same is not shown to Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan. I'm not very sure whether Radhakrishnan's philosophy is even prescribed or taught in very many universities, like how we do with Jadu Krishnamurti or even Professor Mohanty, who belongs to this Eastern region. Why is such discrimination? Why is that importance which was due for him is not given? This is one thing you could respond to this. Second, that I have a thought, a doubt in my mind is with regards to what has been presented by Professor Agarwal. I'm not very sure whether it is the difficulty of translation from an original script of any vernacular language. When a translation is made to another language, the significance and the intention with which a term is used is normally lost. Is that what you are referring to when you talked about padarthas of Indian philosophy, especially referring to bhava and abhava? And another is a slight correction, sir. You referred to Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan as the Vice President of India. In fact, he was the first Vice President, but he was the third President of India. That's a small correction of historical facts. And another is, if time permits, now you have referred to many of those terms in Sanskrit, and you also looked at the slokas, where exact translations is not made according to you. This is hermeneutics. You are also looking into the various contexts in which it is used. Now in Asudiya Sukta, the Sukta ends with the word Koveta. Koveta. Does Koveta, according to you, does it refer to a doubt in the mind of the poet? Or does it refer to a suspicion? Or does it refer to negativity? Because you are doing a bit of interpretations and hermeneutics. Only this word, I just wanted to know that this is, it is translated as who knows, who knows. Exact translation is who knows in English. Now, who knows can bring in this suspicion. It can also bring in a kind of negativity. As a scholar of Veda and its hermeneutics that you are doing, would you also throw some light on this word? That. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to see you, sir, after so long.
Thank you, Saji. And now I request Randhir and Devendra, please.
Thank you so much and happy Teachers' Day. And it was really a very interesting and very insightful session. I was just reading last night about some of the lectures given by Sarpalli Radhakrishnan, and the kind of flexible attitude, being a philosopher, being an intellectual, is remarkable thing. And my question is how to develop such flexible attitude. I would say a kind of we need to explore another new area of philosophy, that is philosophy of counseling. I'm just giving one illustration. When he was asked to deliver a talk among Indian Christians, after having the talk, the result was that many Christians, after listening to his lecture, said, if that is Hinduism, we are also Hindus too. So, what kind of pedagogical skills that we can learn from Sarpalli Radhakrishnan is something that we need to, reconsider and understand. So we are facing a kind of time limitation. So next time we'll have another dialogue on his idea of philosophy, a kind of bridging the gap. He had beautifully done bridging the gap between religion and philosophy, and we'll explore some new dimensions in it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now, before Devendra, we have Om Singh, who has raised. So
Okay, he has just finished his PhD. Om Singh, please, sir.
Yes,
पहले मैं थैंक्स देना चाहूंगा आज के दिन जो 1888 को हुआ। और मेरा एक मिस्टर रणधीर जी एक सुझाव है कि किसी भी राष्ट्र के अंदर देश के निर्माण में या प्रगति में एक अध्यापक का बहुत बड़ा हाथ होता है, क्योंकि जहां अपना कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है, जैसे बात करूं मैं डॉक्टर सर्वपल्ली राधाकृष्णन पर, जो तमिलनाडु के रहने वाले थे और उन्होंने उत्तर भारत और दक्षिण भारत में कोई फर्क नहीं, और एक अध्यापक की दुर्दशा को सुधारने के लिए उन्होंने एक अपने जन्म दिवस के उपलक्ष्य के अंदर इस दिन को स्थापित किया, इसको पूरा भारतवर्ष एक उल्लास के साथ मनाता है, क्योंकि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के अकॉर्डिंग अपन सभी लोग इंडियन हैं, नो रिलीजन होता है और नो ही कास्टिज्म होता है, और जो एक वे ऑफ मार्गदर्शन जिसको अपन बोल सकते हैं वो एक होता है। ये था मेरा थॉट जो भी।
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Om. So now Devendra.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. First of all, I wish everybody a very happy Teachers' Day, and really the two teachers as the distinguished resource person of today's dialogue are commendable, and the kind of thoughts were shared were very informative and full of ideas which inspire us to do some research and dig deep to explore unexplored thoughts, to find out hidden facts. Sir, I have a request. I have one observation, one question, and I want to sing one Hindi song just on the occasion of Teachers' Day. So the observation is, sir, related to the speech delivered by Professor Binod Agarwala sir. Sir, while sir was referring to collective portion, body politics, and sir gave an analogy of change of body, and so of course that is well known. Means same fact has been addressed by Vedavyasa in a well-known sloka. That sloka I would like to recite. Vasansi jirnani yatha vihaya navani grihnati naroparani yatha sharirani vihaya jirna nyayanani sanyati navani dehi. So definitely after completion of this age, man's body remains like old clothes, and the soul enters into new clothes. So definitely, and sir referred the institutions, universities or states, constitutions, buildings, administration remains the same, and people keep coming. Means administrators and rulers and executors keep changing. So definitely that is appreciable. One thing, I may not be right, but it is a kind of question. Sir referred sloka number 216 of Bhagavad-Gita. And the essence of that sloka was, sir referred the analogy of non-existence to existence. And that non-existence to existence was referred to mortal beings, for human beings. In Western thoughts, particularly referring to Friedrich Nietzsche, when he talks about existentialism, maybe Western existentialism, he says essence, existence comes first and essence comes later, particularly in terms of living being. He presents example for non-living things like knife or any man-made things. Ideas come first, material is created later on. But in terms of Indian philosophy, particularly the idea referred by Vedavyasa in Bhagavad-Gita, and same is translated by Sir Radhakrishnan, he says ki non-existence, particularly the boy, means when the boy conceives in womb of mother, and then that non-existence takes the shape of body and is born, and definitely the life journey begins. So I want to ask whether Friedrich Nietzsche is right or Vedavyasa is right. That has been the question. And before concluding my ideas, I would like to dedicate one Hindi song, and it is a kind of prayer a song which is sung by the students on the occasion of Teachers' Day. So, sir, allow me to sing the song. And same was played by our convener Randhir Gautam sir in the morning, but I want to recite it in my style. गुरुवर तेरे चरणों की गर धूल जो मिल जाए, गुरुवर तेरे चरणों की गर धूल जो मिल जाए, सच कहता हूँ मेरी तकदीर बदल जाए, सच कहता हूँ मेरी तकदीर बदल जाए। ये मन बड़ा चंचल है, ये मन बड़ा चंचल है, कैसे गुणगान करूं, जितना इसे समझाऊं, जितना इसे समझाऊं, हरगिज ना संभल पाए, गुरुवर तेरे चरणों की गर धूल जो मिल जाए, सुनता हूँ तेरी रहमत, दिन रात बरसती है। सुनता हूँ तेरी रहमत, दिन रात बरसती है। एक बूंद जो मिल जाए, एक बूंद जो मिल जाए, तकदीर बदल जाए। गुरुवर तेरे चरणों की गर धूल जो मिल जाए, ठुकराना हमें ना प्रभु, चाहे जो भी सजा देना। ठुकराना हमें ना प्रभु, चाहे जो भी सजा देना। नजरों से जो गिर जाए, नजरों से जो गिर जाए, हरगिज न संभल पाए। गुरुवर तेरे चरणों की गर धूल जो मिल जाए। बालक अज्ञानी हूँ, कैसे तेरा ध्यान करूं। तेरे ज्ञान का जो साया इस दीन पे पड़ जाए। सच कहता हूँ गुरुवर, सच कहता हूँ गुरुवर, किस्मत ही संवर जाए। गुरुवर तेरे चरणों की गर धूल जो मिल जाए। So thank you very much. This song was dedicated to Professor Binod Agarwala sir, Professor Ramesh, Chandra, Pradhan sir, Anand, Giri sir, and every teacher, every esteemed teacher. Thank you so much, sir. I wish once again a very happy Teachers' Day.
Thank you, Devendra. So now Minati, please.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
Yes.
you are audible. Please.
Yeah, I don't know whether now time is there to tell something or ask some questions or.
Just ask
Hello.
a question, please. I called you.
Yeah,
We could
yeah,
have
yeah.
you. So,
No, maybe something, some problem. I could not hear anything. So in between some time. So,
Okay.
so good evening, everyone. It was very deep and insightful presentation by Professor Ramesh Chandra Pradhan and Professor Agarwala. So I have two questions for Professor Pradhan. Actually, he said about three things, no? Like Gita, Upanishad, and Brahma Shruti. So I just want to know a little bit how it was imbibed in Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan's philosophy. That is one question. And the second question is, in modern days context, how we can imbibe that religion philosophy in our education system. I mean, religion is gone nowadays, like that should be exactly religion or it should be spiritualism. So that is these are the two questions I have for you. And thank you. I wanted to read one Teachers' Day poetry, but I guess there is no time. So
we will see towards the end.
okay.
So thank you. Now I request invite Professor Pradhan to kindly share thoughts, and then Professor Agarwala.
So thank you, Professor Giri. There are two specific questions which are addressed to me. One is by Mr. Saji, now who tells us that Dr. Radhakrishnan has been neglected in the Indian university system, university education, and why it is so. I can tell you from my own experience that he has not been neglected. any book on contemporary Indian philosophy written by eminent authors like D.M. Datta and many others, there is a full-length chapter on Dr. Radhakrishnan. So Radhakrishnan has not been, in a sense, relegated to the background, though the ordinary impression is that he was a statesman, he was more with public affairs, and he at best translated the text, Indian texts like Bhagavad-Gita and other Prasthantrayas, and he is just an interpreter. But I am sorry to tell that this impression is based on wrong understanding or not deep understanding of Radhakrishnan's thought. If you go through his works, there is a definite philosophical concern for him about man, about society, about the world at large. If this is not philosophy, then what is philosophy? Then he has been much discussion has taken place on him. PhD theses have been written on him, and books have been written on him. So in a sense, he is in the limelight, in the philosophical circle. Whether he was a president or not, that few people can remember unless you read the contemporary history of India. But so far as Indian thought is concerned, Indian philosophy is concerned, he will be ever remembered and he will be ever referred to, and his philosophy will inspire for generations to come. Just as Gandhi, the politician, will be forgotten and perhaps has been forgotten, but Gandhi, the thinker, the moral prophet, is still in the minds of the people, if not in the minds of the politicians. So in that sense, I can affirm, I can assure that Dr. Radhakrishnan will be ever remembered as a philosopher. Second question, which has been raised by Minatiji, is regarding the place of the Prasthanatrayas, that is Bhagavad-Gita, Upanishad, and Brahmasutra, and the commentaries on it, how it has helped the shaping of Radhakrishnan's philosophy. As I said, Radhakrishnan is basically a Vedantic thinker. Whether by Vedanta we mean a particular Vedanta or a particular school, I don't mean that. Vedanta is an ever-flowing river, and anybody can take ideas from this ever-eternal Ganga Vedanta. Therefore, I am not confining him to a particular school, either pre-Sankarite, Sankarite, or post-Sankarite. I am telling that his ideas about man, about the universe, about God, about everything that philosophy really is concerned with, comes from his Vedantic sources. That is the ideas of the Upanishad, the Bhagavad-Gita, and the Brahmasutras. They constitute the foundation of any Vedantic thought, and therefore they also constitute the foundation of Radhakrishnan's thought. But he has imbibed the ideas which have been prevalent not only in contemporary India, but also contemporary West. So he has a synthetic approach to philosophy. It is not exclusively Indian, as if Indian philosophy is a creature of its own, that it doesn't belong to the world community. And Indian thinking is not something outmoded that either you live it or reformulate in a different way. So Radhakrishna is taking the eternal ideas from the Vedantic sources and constituting his own philosophical system. So he is an original thinker, he is a creative thinker, a creative synthesizer also. If that is the work of a philosophy, then many philosophers will come under the category, including Hegel. So in that sense, I think Radhakrishnan's creative thinking cannot be minimized in any way. As to one comment I will just make, which has been referred to repeatedly, that Radhakrishnan was only thinking through the colonial eyes that India is lagging behind, therefore India has to be elevated on a par with West. I think that may be contextually true, but that is not true of every creative thinker. Every thinker, whoever is, like Sri Aurobindo, or like Gandhi, for example. Gandhi is also a thinker. Dr. Radhakrishnan is also thinking in his own way and responding to the questions which are raised by the West. But that is not really inspired by a narrow goal of parochialism, that Indian thought must be put on a pedestal for a patriotic reason. I think patriotism is a very small term. In philosophy, patriotism is not the goal. It may be an occasional kind of reference, but when somebody thinks, he thinks like a Plato, he thinks like a Hegel, or he thinks like a Shankara. He is not bound by the region, by the time, and by the historical context. So there is some kind of contemplative approach to philosophy which Radhakrishnan was practicing. So with these words, I thank you once again, and I have been very happy to be a part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pradhan, and we look forward to your nurturance in our SOHSS journey.
Thank you.
And now, Professor Agarwala, please.
See, the first question was regarding the other errors in the first chapter. I will just point out the slokas, but don't ask me to elaborate because that will take a long time. I have already published 2 essays on these 6 errors. That is in Indian Journal of Indian Council of Philosophical Research. One is significance of 3 errors in the Bhagavad-Gita, and then subsequently the errors revisited. So these 6 errors are chapter 1, verse 7. All these are from first chapter, so I need not read the chapter. Verse 7, verse 10, verse 11. All in the mouth of Duryodhana, they are erroneous. And similarly, the verses in the mouth of Arjuna, 35, 36, 37. 3 consecutive verses, they are erroneous. The first 3 are on epic facts. If you take into account the epic facts, the way it has been taken in 110, these all 3 are erroneous. And this 135, the 35, 36, 37, they are erroneous, but on different ground. It is not time to say elaborate on all these 6 errors, but you can note and examine. Be little careful about the words that are used. And then you will understand that there are errors in these verses. Then Saji has asked, first I stand corrected by him that somehow my memory always told me this Radhakrishnan is associated with Dr. Rajendra Prasad. That's why I always thought him as vice president, never as president himself. Though he was the president, yes, he is right. So I stand corrected. As far as the translation is concerned, yes, there are good translations, there are better translations, there is always scope for better translation, but the initial translation, like the one that was done by, say, Watkins of Bhagavad-Gita, definitely nobody can say that was the best translation. Similarly, the early translations of, say, Indian philosophical text, they may need better translations, and there have been translations of, say, Rig Veda, for example, one better than the other. And the latest translation that I find say really superior is by Jamieson, Stephanie W. Jamieson. Her translation with another author that I find really very remarkable. So there is always a scope for improvement so that you can capture the nuances of the original language in a different language, though that is ever say there is scope for improving, because it can never be say 100% correct. Now somebody referred to this verse 222, this Vasansi Jirnani. There again, the view that I hold that stands, and I think he supported me, so I did not elaborate on them. It is, I think he is right in reading this 222. I had a comment on 222 also, but since there was lack of time, so I did not elaborate on that. Now, the last question that I remember, which I will ask is, this existence precedes essence, and whether Veda Vyasa, when he makes this distinction between, say, bhava and existence as a vikara, and also makes distinction between existence and also this sat, whether he is right or whether it is the existentialist like Nietzsche who say this existence precedes essence is right. I think I don't think I am in a position to evaluate and compare these different systems of thought. But definitely my heart is with the Indian tradition, and that's why I'm paying so much close attention to the nuances of the terms of Indian tradition and try to glean out the metaphysical say principles from that. And that I take is essential for understanding the collective person, and not like the Western thought where it is for the individual. But individual also is equally important. We have to pay attention to that also. So both are important for me. So this is all the questions that I remember. But if there is anything that is missing, it can be asked. But I had left for something in between when the questions were being asked.
So thank you, Professor Agarwal.
So thank you all.
And now let us plan to meet again with a poem from Minati. She is our poet laureate. So Minati.
Hello.
Minati.
Hello. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Thank you for this, in the depth of time, allowing me to read my poem. So I just want to say two lines. Actually, happy Teachers' Day to all. I suppose everyone is the teacher in the group. So before also, like we had teachers like Mahavir, Shankara, Vivekanand, then Radhakrishnan, and now also we have teachers like Ananta Bhai. And we have teachers like Google also, but that does not make into that. So just I have written something about teacher. The teacher, that for every word it is T for transformation, and E for enlightenment, and A for awakening the spirit, and C for consciousness, and H for hope, and E for echoes of values, and R for the purpose of existence. And given in that theme, I have written the title of my poetry is Teacher. So just that is, God understood my heart, the quest, the darkness inside. God understood my heart, the quest, the darkness inside. So he gifted me a lamp, the teacher, who taught me to challenge all the beliefs and questions, the practices, regardless of the strength and the opposition. The teacher taught me to be myself, to look deep within for the transformation. The ignorant caterpillar metamorphed into a butterfly, fluttering around, collecting the nectar of wisdom from every book it read and every word it heard. The purpose of existence is to bring out the best in self, in others too, spreading happiness all around. So thank you, God, for making teachers who read, rise, shine, and enable others. Thank you. It is dedicated to all the teachers who are my teachers, my friends, and in my circle, and all the teachers of the world. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Minati. So now, Devendra, please, very quickly, in a minute or so.
Sure, sir. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to extend a formal vote of thanks. It is my honor and privilege to bear this responsibility. Now, on behalf of School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Raffles University, Neemrana, Swadhyaya Sachakra Vishwanidham Center for Asian Blue Jamming, and Raise Global Foundation, I extend a deep felt thanks to each and everybody, and particularly our distinguished resource persons, Professor Binod Kumar Agarwal sir and Professor Ramesh Chandra Pradhan sir. Their presentations were unique, but the dialogues they were participated and the kind of response they gave in response to the questions were mesmerizing, and definitely it was a kind of lesson learning like teachers like me. It was a true lesson giving by our two distinguished speakers. I'm thankful to Professor Anant Kumar Giri sir for being the moderator as well as the source of motivation for carrying out the journey of this co-learning. I'm thankful to Justice Meena V. Gombar, Chief Patron of Raffles University. I'm also thankful to Professor Diwakar Goli, the Honorable President of Raffles University. I would like to express my deep felt gratitude to Deepika Dave, the CEO of Raise Global Foundation. I would also like to mention the contribution of Susri Appa in form of raising such a brilliant question. And definitely, how can I forget the name of Minati Pradhanji for reciting such a relevant poem, very apt to the occasion, dedicated to all the teachers. So last but not the least, I express my deep felt thanks to convener of this program, Professor Randhir Kumar Gautam, for planning, executing, and making it materialize. Thank you, sir. And I thank everybody from bottom of my heart. And once again, I wish everybody a very happy Teachers' Day. Namaste.
Thank you, Devendra. And
Thank you, sir.
I just wish to mention that next Sunday, with the input from Minati, we are having a dialogue on happiness. And Dr. Chetri from IIT Kharagpur would be with us and then on 19th of September, we would have the opportunity to revisit our thought on Gandhi and fascism. So we have many things waiting for us, and so we are very enriched by the presence of Professor Agarwala and Professor Pradhan, and we look forward to their kind inspiration in this journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.